Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end of life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Welcome to another episode. As more states legalize medical aid in dying, it's important to keep in mind that the option still isn't reaching everyone who wants it. New research shows it's not just personal preferences keeping people from choosing medical aid in dying or MAiD, it's systemic barriers. Things like lack of awareness, cultural stigma, physicians who refuse to participate, and laws so narrowly written that many suffering people don't qualify at all. In most US states where MAiD is legal, it's only available to those expected to die within 6 months, a definition that excludes people with neurodegenerative conditions, heart failure, and many other slow progressing but life limiting illnesses. My guest today is Bryan Rigg, founder of Axios Consulting. After helping his grandfather access MAiD through Dignitas in Switzerland, Bryan built a practice that now guides others through the same path. We're going to talk about what it really takes to make that journey, the logistical challenges, the emotional weight, and the ethical questions families face when MAiD isn't available where they live. We'll also explore the gaps in public awareness, the legal limits of MAiD in the United States, and what it means to create a peaceful death on your own terms. So grab a warm drink, find a comfortable seat, and join us for the conversation. Bryan, welcome and thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Traci, for having me.
So let's start with what led you to create Axios Consulting and how did your personal journey shape that path?
My son is in this business with me, Justin Rigg, and so we have phraseology in our literature that it's his grandfather and it was my adopted father, his adopted grandfather. So the grandfather and father is used quite often because we have a son and father team. So this was my adopted father that had these issues that came up a few years ago with cognitive decline. And he called me up. His name is Harvard Knowles. He was my favorite teacher at Phillips Exeter Academy. And we have been, thick as thieves, if you will, for the last 30 years. Not only was he my teacher, but later on, when I went back to Phillips Exeter Academy to teach summer school, he was my mentor to teach me how to teach. He proofread many of my books on World War II and the Holocaust when I became a professor and scholar at Southern Methodist University and American Military University. And when I left academia and went on Wall Street, he was my first client. And we've just been very close throughout life, and we were kindred souls. A couple of years ago, I call up Harv and he says, something's not right with me. And I said, well, Harv, what's going on? And he said, I'm just not remembering things very well. And, some of the books that I'm reading, I'm finding that I'm having to repeat the pages because I'm not remembering what I read before. And this guy was a phenomenal teacher. I mean, just naming two names that he helped mentor, Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code was one of his students. In fact, Harv is a character in the Da Vinci Code. Many of the teachers from Exeter are actually characters in Dan Brown's books. He also was a Jack Crane's a mentor who just wrote, he was the screenplay writer for Devotion, the Hollywood movie about the Korean War. And then, of course, without Harv, I would not have been a writer. So, I mean, Harv was a brilliant mind and was an incredible motivator and also just a compassionate, wonderful man. And he was very self-aware. I mean, one of his favorite characters in history was Socrates. The unexamined life is not worth living. Self-reflection. And so when he started having problems, I was like, well, Harv, let's work the problem. He was in the Army, I was in the Marine Corps. I was like, let's just start, figuring out what's going on. Let's go to the experts. Well, make a long story short, he was coming down with frontal lobe aphasia, which the early stages of Alzheimer's. His mother died of Alzheimer's, and she begged him to kill her in the last stages of her disease. And he saw her just waste away, sitting in her own, waste, angry, confused, and with no way out. And his older sister was also at this time suffering. So he saw his mother waste away in 5 years. He saw his older sister struggling with this. He's like, I'm not doing this. And so once he realized that there was a dead end here and it was only going to get worse and he knew what to expect, we started talking about, what to do. And he said, hey, maybe you can shoot me, or, maybe you can sail me off to international waters. He knew I was a sailor, and then tie a cinder block around my neck and throw me overboard. And, this was touch and go type of conversation. Half of it's real, the other half is joking. And I'm like, Harv, even if I take you into international waters, it's still illegal. I can't shoot you. And then we'd have a conversation about him being in the Army and me in the Marine Corps, and that I couldn't even shoot straight, and I just probably wound him and not kill him. And so, and as we were talking about this, then he would go down the road of being very serious. How do I do this and do it in a way that doesn't traumatize the EMTs, the doctors, my family? Maybe I should shoot myself, take sleeping pills. And then we started looking at the MAiD services throughout America. He was living in New Hampshire, but he was originally from Maine. So we started looking at Maine. They had a residency requirement for 6 months to live there before you could start using their services. A lot of the places we called up where we thought they would be helpful didn't return our phone calls. So we called up places in Vermont since it was nearby. Same thing. At that time, you could not travel to Vermont. Now you can, and not be a resident. But there was a resident requirement back then for 6 months. But everywhere we went, we also found what you brought out in your introduction. The problem is you have to have a 6 month terminal illness in order to use the MAiD services in Maine or Vermont. And since nobody will give you a 6 month terminal illness with cognitive decline, frontal lobe aphasia, Alzheimer's, we found out, well, even if we got your residency in these two places, you can't use
Yep.
it.
Until it's way, way too late, because you have to, have the 6 month requirement, and you have to be mentally cognizant. And so by the
Yeah.
time that 6 months is up, you can't, you don't have the cognizant recollection. You can't make those decisions anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to be compos mentis.
Yep.
And that's international law as well as domestic law here in the 12 areas where you can go, like Oregon and California. And so, well, you can't go to California, but if you are in California, you can use it. But you can go to Oregon and you can go to Vermont now. You could travel there. And I guess New York just approved it. It's going to be official law, I guess, in January, and you can travel there as well. But you're right, a lot of times if you wait this amount of time, to get residency, you may not be compos mentis, and then you have to have continually the 6 month terminal diagnosis. And by a lot of times with these people, if they are suffering with Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, by the time some doctor can put a 6 month terminal diagnosis on it, then the person's not there anymore and is non-compos mentis and can't use it. So as we searched around all over the place, Harv's mother's from Canada. So we also looked at the Canadian options at that time. They are more flexible now, thank God, in the last 5 years. But back then they were more restrictive, and we were faced once again getting a passport, getting residency, and so on. So eventually, we were told from a lot of places that we called that you got to go to Switzerland, but nobody really told us where. A few people mentioned Dignitas and Pegasus. Well, we eventually started talking to Dignitas, and we found that they were extremely compassionate, uh, very willing to talk to us about our situation. And we quickly realized this was the only place, Switzerland, that Harv could go and enact his wish to have a dignified death and not go down the road of most all Alzheimer's patients. And it was just like many people who would know Amy Bloom's book In Love. It is very uh, trying to figure out the modus operandi, yeah, of what you need to do in order to tick off all the boxes. So it took us over a year to figure this out, and there was a lot of legal problems that we're looking at. His power of attorney in New Hampshire got all scared because it's illegal in New Hampshire, and it's a crime. So he backed out in the middle of this process after signing his checks and helping him with a lot of the interviews. And then we had to shift the power of attorney to his niece. And so I detail this all in a book that I haven't published yet, but it was a very trying experience for all of us when we're trying to focus on his death, his well-being, enacting his wish to die with dignity, but having to deal with all the bureaucracy that was involved. So after we finally got him to Switzerland and to Dignitas, and it was just he and I. Afterwards, I started developing a very good friendship with some of the Dignitas staff. In fact, I got married in Sweden the following summer, and many of the staff came to my wedding, and they became family because we were there for several weeks, and they got to know Harv very well. And during these meetings, I was saying this can't be as complicated as it turned out to be for us. If people only knew what we now know, we could probably help a lot of others. And so Dignitas encouraged us to set up this entity, which is, to my knowledge, the only one in the English speaking world. There's another group in Israel that's doing what we're doing, where my son and I came together talking to Dignitas, saying we need to set up a consulting group of helping people know what they need to do in order to get to Dignitas if they want to and streamline it for them and remove that stress so they can focus on their loved ones and preparing for their death. So that was, in short, kind of the journey that led my son and I to set up Axios Consulting, and why we feel very passionate about it, especially with helping our patriarch, enact his final wish the way he wanted to.
What was it like when you got to Dignitas, and what was that experience like for you, both of you, or all of you, I should say?
It was very strange. I mean, to use a Greek ancient myth, being the Charon to take my father over the river Styx into the other world, it was surreal to a large extent. And I still, every step of the way, just like we all do with our own lives, we think death has nothing to do with us. Sigmund Freud said the reason why people make bad decisions every day is because they think death has nothing to do with them. So I was under that illusion with Harv to some degree. It's like we're going to continue on having our conversations. Harv was still Harv. And but as we had the meetings with Dignitas, you have to have two in-person meetings that are separated by 24 hours with a social worker and a doctor. And I think after that second meeting, when they basically gave him the green light to go to their little house dash chateau, if you will, that's outside of Zurich, where you take the sodium pentobarbital and you end your life. After that second interview, when it was really, and that they set a time for the next day, Dignitas was extremely kind, always telling Harv he could back out. But when that moment happened, then it was very emotional for me, realizing this was the last day I was going to have with a guy that was closer to me than my biological father, hence why he's my adopted father. And so that was very, very hard. But Dignitas, it was a surreal experience of why we're going there, because very few people plan their death. You know, maybe in combat, in the spur of the moment, you're going on a mission that you most likely won't come back from. But a lot of times, I was in the military, I was in the Israeli army as well as the Marine Corps. A lot of times, even in those type of missions, you have some type of hope. There might be one way out. Here, there was definitely nothing. And so that's when I really lost it, with him, and was emotional after the doctor and the social worker left and so on. But he never wavered. He never blinked. And that strength that he had, that he knew what awaited him if he did not do this, the pain and trauma he would inflict on his family, the suffering he would have himself, the waste of resources and time and medical staff. He was clear in the head all the way to the end, incredible courage, and that gave me a lot of strength as well.
It's interesting that you mentioned that he was thinking not only about himself, that he was thinking about others. And so, of course, then there are the ethical considerations. Are you doing this for yourself or for others? What do you think are the biggest misconceptions you hear about medical aid in dying or Dignitas? I know many people don't hear about Dignitas, so maybe just medical aid in dying. What are some of the biggest misconceptions you hear?
What I think as a person who's an ethical humanist, the biggest conception is that if these people in America, in particular, with the Bible Belt where I live in Texas, is that this is the unforgivable sin.
Yep.
And this was an official Catholic preachment for a long time, and it still is, that it's suicide, it's not medical aid in dying, and that the people are violating like a sacred trust that God has given them, giving them life, that if God wanted you to die by your own hand, he would have designed society that way, but that's not the way it is. And if God decides to take you this way, you need to trust God. If you don't, this is an unforgivable sin because you're killing yourself in Catholic, tradition. You can't take last rites, and so on. I mean, in Hamlet, Shakespeare writes about Ophelia, who commits suicide, and as the grave diggers are digging her grave in a church because there's a little bit uh doubt about did she actually drown accidentally or did she actually kill herself. We know she killed herself, and the grave diggers are like, this is not this person is not worthy of a Christian burial. So this has been part of the Christian ethos for a long time. So that's one misconception, I think, that a lot of theology has not risen up to the level of compassion to realize, what, this is not an unforgivable sin. This is not something that, people should be forced to suffer because God wants them to do this, because nobody is in God's mind if God does exist. So I think that's one thing that I think, as a society, struggle with. Another side of it is just, I think there's just a negative connotation coming from our Christian tradition in general, whether you're a Christian or not, that if you take your own life, it's like a sign of weakness.
Yep.
It's a sign of being a coward, if you will, not being able to face up to the trials and tribulations of life, and trying to work those problems as they confront you. I also think it's just so new in the medical world to be able to accept this. I mean, just think it's in the 90s that it started becoming legal in America in some states and in Europe, of all places. Once again, coming from I think our Judaic Christian tradition, that commandment, thou shalt not kill, which means also thou shalt not kill thyself. So I think that's probably one of the biggest hurdles we as a society have, whether it's consciously done with belief at the forefront, or it's because we've grown up in this environment where people, when they talk about suicide, they pity those individuals that do that, and it's a sign of weakness in general in our society, which with medical aid and dying, it's anything but weakness.
I hate the term assisted suicide because it's not suicide. People who take and die from suicide are people who want to die. People who are doing medical aid and dying, they don't want to die. They are dying. They are choosing the method and manner that they're choosing quality of life over quantity of life is what they're doing.
Yeah, and on that note, Tracy, in our community, that's the phraseology and semantics where it's going.
Yep.
That it is a much more positive way of looking at it by saying medical aid and dying. And Harv, to support what you just said, he was talking to me one night as we're sitting by Lake Zurich and talking about this whole situation. He's like, if I was who I was 4 or 5 years ago, this would be unthinkable.
Yeah.
This would be preposterous. I would, I embrace life. I love life. But he says, if I stay the way I am and I continue on going down the road, you will come to despise me. And it will not be who I am. I will just be the shell, the skin shell of holding the person physically, but my soul will be gone. And so that's the way he approached it in his phraseology, how he looked at this. And he's basically just saying it's my journey, it's my quest, and I'm ending it with dignity. And he never really used the word suicide either. He basically just say, I'm offing myself so I'm not a burden anymore, and he was always kind of making a joke. I mean, as Edgar Allan Poe says, to quote these people that he taught me, if you can go out of life laughing, that is the greatest death you can give your loved ones. And that's what Harv was doing. I mean, we literally was laughing all the way till the very end. I mean, it was kind of funny. We had talked a little bit about the crazy afterlife beliefs of different religions, and we had talked about the 72 virgin, horrible belief of the Muslims that if you martyr yourself, you get 72 virgins in heaven. So then later on, as he takes the sodium pentobarbital, one of the nurses that really got to be very fond of Har said, "Hey, she misspoke. She says, good luck with your 42 virgins." And so I look up at Harv. I'm like, yeah, Harv, if you lived a better life, you'd have 72. But as it is, you only get 42. And he's like, I can work with 42. 42 is okay. So I mean, this is how he approached this situation, with laughter, with humor, with dignity. And yeah, he would agree with you that the assisted suicide, although scientifically it might be the apt word semantically, the connotations that it brings up are so negative,
Yeah.
and it doesn't really define what these people are doing. And medical aided dying is the best way we've come now to address that issue using that term, that phraseology.
Yeah. Now, how does Axios Consulting support people who want to use Dignitas?
There's three programs that we offer as far as consulting, and with Dignitas, the first two are a requirement. The first one is getting membership. So you want to make sure that you qualify under Swiss law and under Dignitas procedures that you can use their center. So the first stage of consulting and helping people is educating them about what is expected, what you need to do, and kind of holding their hand through the bureaucracy of getting that membership. And countless people I've talked to, it's something that they wish it was more streamlined. And I think my son and I have developed a way to streamline that pretty quickly. Excuse me one moment. And what that allows them, had something in my eye. Tracy, sorry about that.
That's okay.
So the way to get people membership is to go through that bureaucracy. So we help them to get membership. Now they don't necessarily have to, once they get membership, they don't have to act on it. But I think that's an empowerment for a lot of these people, that they have that arrow in their quiver if they need to put it out and put it in their bow. And so getting the first stage is very critical, membership. And then once they want to use Dignitas and go there and enact their medical aid in dying, what we have offered is, both my son and I are fluent in German. We've lived in Germany. We've been to Switzerland multiple times. We know Zurich. We've met the staff, both my son and I, many times. One of us will be there in Zurich to receive the family, the death doula, whatever entourage is coming, and help them navigate the city, help organize the meetings with the doctor and the social workers, get them to the Blue House, is what it's called. If they get that window open after passing their two, verbal exams. And then once that happens, we help them there along the way, kind of over the river Styx, if you will. But that was something also, even though I've lived in Europe, it was a little disconcerting to kind of know where to go, what place to stay. We know the good hotels, we know the good Airbnbs. There's even a group we're working with that if people need assisted living help, like in a retirement center, there's a retirement center we can have the people go to. So we have this all planned out and can help them with the second stage of getting there and making sure they're guided around it. They don't have to think about the logistics. They just can think of themselves, think of their loved ones, and prepare themselves for the next stage of their journey. The third stage is for the people who have the wherewithal, and we've heard that a lot of people in Israel are doing this, that want to have a final send off with their family, like have a reunion, if you will, of bringing loved ones there and walking in parks, going to some final concerts, doing some restaurants. We'll organize all that for them as well. And sometimes you'll have 20 people in that blue house, three generations, when the matriarch or patriarch makes that decision to go to the other side. So that's our third service that we would be offering people to set that all up. And 1 or 2 weeks, if they wanted to be in country, we know the restaurants, we know the museums, we know the city very well. And so those are our services at Axios Consulting.
Amazing, amazing. I love that memory making. I didn't know, like I knew the first two services. I didn't know about your third service about that memory making and really just having that send off of that love, and that's amazing. So thank you for.
And another part of that, I'm going to thank you, Tracy, for your kind words. Another part that I think is important is and just for people knowledge about me, my first book's called Hitler's Jewish Soldiers. I interviewed 450 men of Jewish descent who served in the Nazi military, and it's about 800 hours of video. The
Wow,
Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. just took over all my interviews that were on VHS and 8 millimeter, and we digitalized them all. To
amazing.
my knowledge, it's the second largest oral history collection in the Holocaust Museum as we speak. The reason why I say this is something that I've taught my son. I've taken him on battlefield tours like Iwo Jima, Saipan, Gettysburg, Vicksburg, and I've had him interview a lot of veterans, World War II. Of course, he wasn't able to do Civil War veterans, but he's interviewed probably about 60 or 70 himself. I've interviewed hundreds. So one thing that we will offer during this time, if people want to, is that we will interview these people before they go to the Blue House, and if the family wants us to put together a legacy movie, of asking those tough questions. Let's say there's some grandkids that haven't graduated high school yet. We'll ask them, if you were here, if you could have been here, what would you want to say to Aaron? What would you want to say to Sabina?
Yep.
When they get married, what would you say? Tell us about your life and open-ended questions, and then have that as a legacy play for people who want to use it.
Yeah, people don't realize how important that is. And I believe in video too. That's my go-to. There are letters, there are books you can create, but my real go-to, part of it is my husband is also a video producer, so he does this. But there is nothing like hearing that person's voice and seeing them speak. And my mom, we have a video of my grandmother who has long since passed away, but my mom says, when I'm forgetting her voice or what she says, I will put on that video. And it is a gift. It really is a gift to be able to see and hear your loved one again. So good on you for doing that. That is so necessary. And I recommend everyone who has parents and grandparents, start interviewing them. It doesn't matter what age they're at. You don't know what tomorrow will bring. Just have learn about them. So yeah. So anyways, getting back to what we're talking about. I'm curious because I'm wondering what kinds of people reach out to you. Are there like patterns in age or diagnosis or geography or even backgrounds that you see?
Well, right now, most of the people that have come have been female, and I think that's because they just live longer. So I think that's part of it. We are just getting off the ground, so we're starting to feed the quote unquote pipeline, if you will, interviewing people, vetting them, talking to them about their options. And what's interesting that I found in this beginning stage of the last 4 or 5 months is that a lot of people, once it becomes real, there's a lot of fear and emotions, not necessarily from them, but from their family members that are on the Zoom call. And it reminds me of what our counterpart Shlomi in Israel has experienced. He gets like 200 inquiries a month, and only two or three really step over the line and enact their goal to get to Switzerland. So I think it's critical mass as far as getting a lot of people in the pipeline, finding those who do have the wherewithal psychologically as well as financially to do this and have the support from the family. That is critical. So that's been a very interesting phenomenon that a lot of people, when they reach out to us initially, they seem to be overly enthusiastic to just get it over with, get to Switzerland, and stop the pain and anguish. Once we explained to them that under Swiss law, it looks like they would be able to do so. Dignitas would have the final word, but they would go through it. But they check all the boxes from what we have seen. That kind of like realization that this could be the end. That's been a very interesting kind of phenomenon that I've seen. But I think it's only all too human. The strive for most people to live as long as they can and to enjoy their family members, enjoy their hobbies and so on. It's a very powerful drive. And many of them, with the degenerative diseases, cognitive diseases, I think a lot of them are like, you know what, just one more month or
Yeah.
2 more months, and you can't help but support and love them in this respect. But the people that are coming to us are the ones that don't fit into the MAiD of America, and they feel lost. So at least we give them hope that there is this option. There's looks like there's two families that we will probably help this next year go over and do so. Most of them, what we focus on primarily is Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, ALS. I lost my father-in-law to that disease, and then like you mentioned with the heart issues, when they have congestive heart failure, they know it's going to kill them. They don't have very good life. They have the swelling. They can't move around. And so those are the individuals that we're focusing on, and we're getting more and more referrals as we reach out to death doulas. Death doulas have been an amazing kindred spirit community, if you will, about how they've approached this, the people they're talking to. I think it's very critical that when people go over to Switzerland, they need to have a few loved ones and or a death doula.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is a high percentage of the people, out of the small pool that we talk to, don't have any kids. So I think in that respect, a death doula is really critical to have somebody with them along the journey to help them talk through things maybe the last day who have developed that relationship. We're happy to talk to the people and so on, but when we come in, we're approaching this as military officers, if you will, to making sure the logistics are done. There's no surprises. They know what to expect and they're taken care of. They know they got their food, their lodging, their documents in order. But if they want to talk to us, that'd be great. But having that death doula or a child or someone along is something I think is very important. And so that's something that we also encourage our people to do. But those are kind of some of the observations just off the cuff right now of what my son and I have seen in the interviews that we've had and the questionnaires that have come in from the people who are looking at our company.
That's interesting. Yeah, I get called in a lot to have these conversations, even on Zoom, a lot of times with people who are going to do medical aid and dying and talking with their families and how to approach that. And it's always a conversation about quality of life. And that's how I always start. And even when I'm working with people who are okay or not really sick yet, and we're working on their advanced directives, I always start with the quality of life conversation. But in that, we're talking about, life sustaining measures. And then at the end of this conversation, I'll have a full on conversation about medical aid and dying with the people, even though that's usually not part of the conversation of the advanced directive. But I think it's so important to have that conversation at that time because you're talking to your family, after I always bring the family in, I bring their proxies, their healthcare proxies, and also to have this conversation also, so everyone's aware. And I always talk about that with them because
Mhm.
it's important. It's an option, and hopefully it will be an option to more and more people.
Mhm.
The timeline that we're looking at, I know that you threw out like a 5 month number just a couple minutes ago, but I was wondering, what is the actual timeline? Like, what should people plan for if they're going to call you? What should they expect as far as timeline?
Well, what we think, because we haven't, tested this, but now that I know what we did with Harv and what I've talked to a few others, what they did, like Amy Bloom and Erica, who you put me in touch with, Bacchus, um, you know, we think if somebody is ready to go and the family is supportive, we think, a few months, maybe up to 5 months, we can maybe streamline to 2.5 months. And is required again is you got to get membership. Once you get membership, then they open up a travel window. Now, if you have cognitive decline issues, if you don't use that travel window, which is usually 3 weeks, you have to then resubmit later on a report from your psychiatrist or psychologist that you're still compos mentis. And they may even do a phone call with you internationally and make sure that you still are who you are. Then they'll open up another 3 week, travel time. So, we're thinking, hey, we could probably get membership within a few months, and then they open up that window. Okay, so that might be 3 months, it might be 4 months. There might be something they want to do in the meantime, a kid's graduation, birth of a grandchild, so but we could have probably a time frame within 5 to 6 months where they could get over there and enact their medical aid in dying. So that's how it looks. And with the documentation, the reason why it takes a lot of people, I think, longer than what it should is you only have a few hours where you can call Switzerland during the day in most time zones in America. So if you have a problem or you're confused about what's going on, if you are in the afternoon, you can't call. Dignitas is only 11 active staff members.
Mm.
So, and they're getting hundreds upon hundreds of inquiries a week. And so there's only so much bandwidth that they can give each person to some degree. Whereas with us, my son and I, we can give a lot more to people. We are, basically maybe 1 or 2 hours off at the most being in the center of the United States. And we know what the procedures are and what they need to do, and we can answer a lot of the questions that they would be putting to Dignitas. It may take 2 or 3 days for Dignitas to respond. We can respond in real time, basically, of what they do: consent forms, medical files, history, dental records, birth certificates, originals. I mean, all these things that people aren't thinking about, because we don't do a lot of death planning in America.
No.
And that kind of reminds me of another thing, that one of the hindrance, I think, to a lot of people is not only do we have the religious communities a lot of times that are negative about this, but we have a legal system that's negative. And since we saw what I think is the horrendous, revoking of Roe versus Wade in women's rights, people are even more skittish about it because Governor Abbott has claimed that he'll chase people out who go out of state to help their teenage daughters or women with medical issues to have abortions outside the state. Now, luckily, there's no prosecutions that we know of, and people who have helped people go to Dignitas from America have not been prosecuted in the states where it's illegal, although it's written in the law. So that's another thing that I think is really huge, actually, Traci, now that we're kind of brainstorming and talking about this. We had a very in-depth legal opinion put together by a medical lawyer who's an expert in the law of what people need to be thinking about and how they need to do things to make sure that they feel protected and are protected as best they can under our legal structure, because we only have 12 states or districts where it's legal.
Yep.
The other places like New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Texas has it written into the legal code that it's illegal to help somebody do assisted suicide, as it's the phraseology is used. So that's another thing I think that's really big that our company does that may be underestimated by a lot of people is that when you sit down with very sophisticated people to be able to say, hey, not only did we go through this and we haven't had any problems, and this is what we did and how we went about it to make sure we didn't have any problems, but we've actually given the money over and had medical legal experts put this together to show what you need to do and how you need to be thinking about this when you decide to take care of a loved one who's in a state where it is illegal, which is now, almost 40,
Yeah.
unfortunately. It needs to be universal, it needs to be a federal law, but we're a long ways away from that, Traci,
Oh
unfortunately.
yeah. I mean, we don't even have doctors talking about this or natural deaths, so we have a long, long way to go. Um, what do you think, or what does a good death mean to you? And how has that understanding changed by having these experiences and helping other people?
Good and powerful question. When I was in the Marine Corps and the Israeli Army, you think about death, but you always think it's the other guy. And of course, you write your letters that are going to be mailed off in case you die. Mom or your wife will get it. You have your life insurance. You put your name, on a lot of your clothing for not because you're afraid you're going to lose your clothing. It's because for identification, reasons in case you get blown up. So, I thought an awful lot about death when I was serving, when I was studying the Holocaust and thinking about what would have happened to my Jewish family, had they remained in Germany and so on. You think about a lot of death. Quite often when I see the victims, like in my book, Japan's Holocaust, there's a lot of pictures in there of these young girls, teenage girls that were raped and then slaughtered and left out in the streets. And I think about that death and like, okay, I'm not going to forget you. You're going to have a voice. So in my life, I've thought an awful lot about it. But to be in a room with somebody that actually died, I wasn't in the room with my grandmother when she passed, but with Harv holding his hand, seeing his last breath taken, it really just brought home Carpe Diem. And you know what Harv told me when we struggled with this about death and so on, he's like, everybody has to die. And if you can determine how you do die and that you die on your feet with your head high and with dignity, that is the most beautiful way to go. And he says, I choose that.
Mm.
And so it's changed the way that Harv's given me courage. That I have four wonderful children. I have a beautiful wife. But if I ever have any of these problems, I now know what to do. I know kind of how to approach this because I had not only a great mentor to teach me how to write and love American literature and Moby Dick and Herman Melville, but he's also taught me how to face death with not blinking and to embrace it as just a cycle of life. We all have to do it, but doing it well, many of us do not. And some of our medical systems is forcing this on us. Is another interesting thing to kind of explain and why I'm here, and also answer your question: how did I get here? My biological father suffered with Parkinson's for 20 years. And at the very end of his life, he was put into a center, Casamore in Florida, which is a horrible center, suffering with Parkinson's, and they would not enact his living will
Mm.
because the Terry Schiavo case was going on and it was a mess there. And they were scared of lawsuits and won. Finally, when Terry Schiavo's case was, finalized in favor of the husband, and she was allowed to die because she was brain dead. My father died. They then withheld water and food, and he died a few weeks later. But was that the most humane way to let him die, wither away for 3 years? He was 6'3", normally 220 pounds. When he died, he was 120 pounds. And he was confused. He didn't know where he was. And so that also made me really resolve with Harv when he asked me to help me, and support me in my decisions here. I was like, I'm not gonna let Harv go through what I saw my dad, biological father, did, and this is now my real father in many respects. He was so much more of a mentor to me than my own dad. I was like, you're not gonna go through that, and if this is the way you want to do it, I'll be with you all the way. And so I think another thing that's taught me about death is that a lot of times people who hang on to their loved ones or let them wither away that way, it's more about them than about the person.
Yeah.
It's a selfish thing that we want these people to stay around more. And it comes from one part love, but another part it's very selfish. It's not about you. If this person wants to go and is miserable, then they should have the right to do it on their own terms. And that America in general does not allow people to do this, especially people in the situations of my biological father and adopted father, is really a shanda. It's a disgrace of our society that we don't allow people to have this dignity and be able to end on such a good note. And this is what's important, I think, for people to know. And Dignitas brings this research out. Many people who feel they don't have the option, a lot of times take matters into their own hands. And a lot of times they botch it. So they only end up injuring themselves. And so then they live in even more misery. Or they do it in such a way that it's so traumatic, and the memory that's left for the family is traumatic, whether it's with a shotgun or jumping in front of a semi, that they feel so desperate that they have to take it to that extent, and they don't realize the trauma that gives to the family. Whereas what Dignitas does in our states that where it's legal is allow people to have a good memory and a good legacy. And that is one of the greatest gifts we can give our children and grandchildren and our loved ones, that when our time comes, we are able to do it in such a way where it's not traumatic, where it's not grotesque, but it is with grace and dignity.
Yeah.
And I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah. And that's for people who meet the qualifications, because as we've talked about with dementia or other neurodegenerative diseases, it's not an option in the United States, unfortunately. And I know that there are groups like Final Exit Network that do a great job in educating, um, because sometimes it comes down to cost, and many people can't afford to go to Switzerland, unfortunately. Um, so there are options out there that people should you should know about. Now, if you could change one thing about how medical aid and dying is handled in the US, be it in law or culture or healthcare, what would it be? You could change one thing only, okay? Just one thing.
Okay. Well, on that note, the one thing obviously is that it would be a universal right.
Hmm.
Uh, and with qualifications, I mean, you don't want somebody who's just very depressed and having a bad day being able to go to these centers. You want a process, which Dignitas does. The several weeks, months leading into it, you definitely know who you're dealing with. But yeah, a universal right. And on that note, speaking of wherewithal, I want to let people know Dignitas does have a stipend for people in need, and they waive their fees. And what we're planning on doing with our
Nice.
wealthy patrons is setting up a 501(c)(3) on the side. So then when people come to us and they can't afford it, they were a school teacher their whole life, or they were, a veteran, or for whatever reason they were not financially able to do so. We hope to build out a 501(c)(3), and the few people we've talked to, if they were willing to do so, were in the affirmative. In fact, we've actually had some people say we'll be willing to donate to it now. So we hope to set up a system like that, which Dignitas has done for their own fees as well. So We want to put that out there as well. But coming full circle, one thing if I could change, federal law. If somebody wants to check out and they have grounds for it because they're suffering, they should have that God-given right, if you will, when they decide to say, I'm done.
Yep, yep. Yeah, I agree with that. It's autonomy. It's a question of autonomy, and that,
Mm-hmm.
so and thank you for telling us about setting up that fund. It is so important to take care of each other, and I appreciate that. So, Bryan, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. Before we wrap up, can you share with people how they can learn more about Axios Consulting and how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. So our website is axiosconsulting.org. There's a questionnaire in there. Please reach out to us if you want to learn more about our operation, if you feel our operation can help you. We're monitoring the site all the time, and I thank you for that plug, Traci, and thank you so much for having me on your show today.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I'll put that information, of course, in the description of this episode. So, folks, if you want to get a hold of him, please just go there and you'll see the link. So,
Thank you,
listeners,
Traci.
medical aid and dying is meant to offer choice. But right now, that choice is limited by geography, by legal definitions, and by silence. In most states where MAiD is legal, the law only applies to people expected to die within 6 months. That excludes many with conditions like ALS, Parkinson's, or dementia, people who are suffering but don't fit the legal mold. It also depends on where you live, whether your doctor is willing to help, and whether you've even been told that this option exists. That's not what dignity should look like. We need better laws. We need more transparency. And we need to keep having these conversations because informed choices can't happen in the dark. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please comment below or reach out to me directly. And if you found this conversation to be helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. This is Traci Arieli from Comforting Closure, wishing you peace and comfort in your journey. Until next time, take care.